What's up guys, in this video we'll take a closer look at the newly released Diadem Axis 98 and compare them to the direct competition in the spin orientated 98 lines. If you didn't know, Diadem is a company from the US that sells tennis and pickleball gear ranging from apparel, strings, but most importantly to me, a few different racket lines. The Diadem rackets are made up of their Elevate line, which is for control, competing against the Blade, the Nova line, which is their power rackets and competing against the likes of the Pure Drive and the E-Zone 100, and now the Axis series, which is their spin line and obviously a direct competitor to the Aero 100 and the 98. The Axis 98 got notable attention at the start of this year, as Diadem is now sponsoring Elina Svitolina, and she adopted the Diadem Axis 98 over her original Wilson Steam 99, which just re-released as the Ultra Pro 99. Given that she dropped the Steam 99, which is a popular racket, for the Axis 98, that gives you a rough indication that the Axis 98 is not a gimmick only, but most likely a quality racket. Whilst most of the shape is similar to the Aero line, the edges of the frame come to a much sharper finish on the throat and around the hoop compared to the Aero, so it's not a complete carbon copy, but obviously it's closer than not. The main difference is that it will be more dampened and aimed at providing more comfort than the Aero, whilst trying to keep up with spin and power as well. Unlike the Elevate line, the paint on the Axis does not have that velvet and rubbery finish, which I think makes it look nicer, and with predominantly a kind of gunmetal grey colour and orange accents, to me it's much more appealing than the Aero or the Aero Rafa colours, which personally turned me away from the racket, even though it's pretty solid and a great performer. So in this review, the other rackets we'll be comparing the Axis 98 to is the Aero 98, the Gravity Tour, the T-Fight 305S, and the Vcore 98. Quick look at the spec comparison on the screen and the strings that I've used for the frames, so just pause where you need to. Also, I definitely have fiddled around with the customizations for all rackets, but since we're speaking on stock form, I'm not going to touch on customizations much. So let's start with feel and stiffness. The Gravity Tour is going to give you something flexible but still have a crisp feel, with it kind of being targeted towards those who like a premium and old school feel that is the most comfortable out of the 5 rackets. The Axis 98 is more on the muted side amongst all the frames, but is more comfortable despite the 67 stiffness rating. I like it because it gives you a bit more ball pocketing than the Aero 98, and I don't personally mind the muted feel that much. Especially that it doesn't have the velvety paint type as the Diadem Elevates, which I think add an extra layer of muted feel. And for comfort wise, I'd say it's closer to the Vcore 98, with the Vcores edging them out. For the Aero 98, it's kind of dependent on what string you use, but some strings can bring out a very hollow, brassy and harsh feel. So I actually like to use a muted or thicker string to bring out more of a solid feel. If you use the right hybrid, it's comfortable enough, but I'd still warn anyone who suffers from pre-existing injuries. But in terms of the quality of feel, there's just something about the Aero that even when I crush a big ball, there's not much of a satisfying feel to it, but the ball is definitely going to be the most effective out of the 5. For the T-Fight 305S, it's very responsive. You can feel how firm the frame stays on contact, but the string bed does give in when you hit the ball, so it gives you just enough pocketing for a well-rounded experience. The only problem is that I've had the most comfort issues with the T-Fight, even over the Aero 98, and I personally have to be a bit more pickier with string choice. But if you don't have issues with the comfort, I think the quality of feel is actually excellent alongside the Gravity, but for totally opposing reasons. The Vcore 98 seems to have the most natural balance of ball pocketing and racket flex amongst all these rackets. It sits right in the middle, where it certainly works well with a crisp yet soft string, and I find the comfort to be second best here. For feel, I would personally rank the Gravity Tour as first, the T-Fight 305S, then the Vcore, Axis and Aero following up. Some might prefer the Aero 98 over the Axis, which is understandable, but I personally like the Axis a bit better. For comfort, I would rank them in order of the Gravity Tour, the Vcore, the Axis, the Aero 98 and then the T-Fight. For power, the Gravity Tour is the most player-orientated frame in these comparisons. It will have the least free power and the most accessible to players with great technique and fluidity. It will require the most advanced technique to fully maximize its potential. For the Axis 98, the Axis gives, say, less than 10% of the output compared to the Aero 98, but still very capable in its own right. What I like better about it is that it's easier to generate racket head speed compared to the Aero because it has a little bit more maneuverability and freedom in the swing. Therefore, it does give me more confidence and I feel more in control of my shots if I go big. But power wise, I'd probably say it's on par with the Vcore 98. For the Aero 98, nothing matches the Aero 98 for max power, except maybe the Pure Strike 98 when it comes to real and raw power for 98 square inch tweeners. Though, as I touched on, the Aero doesn't feel extremely satisfying to hit personally, and because of its weight distribution, I can't get as free and as fluid on my strokes as I would like to, but despite all that, the Aero still provides decisively the most amount of power. The T-Fight has a good mix of maneuverability for racket head speed and stiffness for power output, although slightly offset by its denser 18-19 string pattern in compensation for more accuracy. Perhaps the T-Fight 300 would be a better comparison here, but I also think that the T-Fight 300 is probably not as special, but it is easier to use, and at the end of the day, it is a different weight class. The Vcore 98 can give some epic power, but I think some struggle to reel the higher launch angle in and the open string pattern. In my opinion, it's more powerful than the E-zones, which are supposed to be more attributed to the power line on Yonex, but nonetheless, in the right hands, it is deadly, and for the people who can't adapt to it, it's launchy and uncontrollable. For power, I would rank them in this order, with the Aero 98 being first, the Axis 98, and the Vcore being quite a tight second. Then the T-Fight and the Gravity Tour could be somewhat interchangeable, but the T-Fight is easier to swing faster. For maneuverability, the Gravity Tour's maneuverability really depends on your stroke style, but for the average recreational player, I don't think it's as user-friendly for its balance point and teardrop shape, making it feel a little more sluggish for those without sound mechanics. Rather, it will suit someone who is able to really generate their own racket head speed, so out of the 5, it's probably the most difficult to use, but certainly the most rewarding as well. The Axis 98 is a very versatile racket and allows for a variety of swing styles, whether it's open face, closed face, large or short takebacks, very extended or snappy swings. This is the biggest difference to the Aero 98 because it has less weight concentrated at the bottom of the hoop and the throat shape also has a sharper finish than the Aero, which probably allows a little bit more for wrist freedom and short and quick movements in sticky positions. It's only slightly less maneuverable compared to the T-Fight due to its thicker variable beam, but not a difference that I think matters all that much. The Aero 98 has this clunkiness to it that is similar to the E-Zone 98 2025 model. The weight distribution may not be the most user-friendly for a variety of swing paths. You can see it in the way that pros are using this frame, especially on their forehands, where they have a very extended swing, and when moving into the forward motion of their swing, their racket face opens up early, really driving through the ball with momentum and body weight. And this also includes when they're trying to spin the ball as well. You will not see as many people be wristy with this frame, despite the big brother Aero 100 being the complete opposite in terms of hitting style. The T-Fight feels excellent to swing and is noticeably the fastest moving. The problem is definitely for me to do with the grip shape still. If you have troubles with it, the only way to make it better is to get a professional customizer to redo the handle completely, or a quick fix is to add some tape or strips of overgrip to bevels 3 and 7, making the shape more square and less rectangular. And although it doesn't feel 100% natural, but is a cheap option and actually does help me quite a lot. The Vcore 98 doesn't quite suit the really wristy player, but it doesn't mean it's a slow frame. It kind of falls in between the Aero and the Axis. It won't be as easy to handle as the 2022 E-Zone 98, but this is easier and more natural to swing with a variety of styles compared to the 2025 E-Zone 98. For maneuverability, I would give it to the T-Fight, followed by the Axis, the Gravity Tour, the Vcore, and then the Aero 98. For control, the Gravity Tour control-wise, it flattens out better than the Vcore 98, even though giving a little less power, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. As I say, it does very well to switch between super high arcing balls and flat driving balls. Why people think the Gravity Tour is launchy is a result of them struggling to adapt their swings or spins to the ball depending on what they're receiving, or the open string pattern definitely can lead to a faster tension loss, so you will lose accuracy in that way, in which I personally like to go for higher tensions and probably no less than a 1.25mm string. The Axis 98 has a lot of swing versatility, plenty of spin, and slightly less power than the Aero 98, where the Aero 98 has a very springy response. I find the Axis in comparison certainly has a bit more control, where the Aero 98 is going to give me a bigger ball, but I don't feel as connected and free. And I tend to be much less consistent and precise with the Aero for the sake of power and spin, whereas the Axis I feel like I can switch between swinging out and redirecting or guiding the ball a bit easier. The Aero 98, whilst I don't think it has bad control by any means, it's more of a spin control racket, but amongst these frames, true accuracy and precision, or at least the confidence and connection to the ball, is not quite there for me. I feel the most in control going super heavy on the spin and going for big wide open targets, but as an aggressive player it's difficult for me to redline as much as my usual rackets. Control and accuracy has to go to the T-Fight without a doubt. You can't beat a denser string pattern and a lower launch angle if you are seeking precision, but its overall versatility and maneuverability with the connection to the ball is what combines it to make it a great racket to reel it all in and control it as you need. The Vcore 98, I do understand the concerns of people who struggle with its launch angle, but like the Gravity and both having open string patterns, it's how well you suit the frame, firstly, and secondly, how well you can adapt to it. There are plenty of players who can only hit flat or only spin. And generally when people struggle with open string patterns, they swing in one manner for the majority of balls, expecting the same result. I actually find that I have some of my longest rallies with the Vcore out of all these frames because it's just a nice flowing racket with a lot of forgiveness, and if you find the right specs and you have the right swing, it actually works out great. In order of control, it'll be the T-Fight, then the Axis and Gravity Tour can be tied for second, followed by the Vcore 98 and then the Aero 98. For stability and forgiveness, the Gravity's swing weight needs to be at least in the high 320s for it to hold up because of its super flexible throat that will struggle to compete with the stability of the thicker variable beams from the other racket. So it does need to compensate with swing weight. Forgiveness is not bad overall, but this is when you are balanced and ready. And whilst you might think it's forgiving to hit back and forth with, under competitive pressure, especially against players that are better than you, who make you rush and unable to think clearly, your footwork and defensive skills are really going to have to come to life. For the Axis 98, I think it perfectly spec'd Axis 98 will come in a swing weight that's probably a little bit low. I also feel the same for the Aero 98, but they both seem to shine the most in the higher 320 range at minimum, as they don't play super stable or forgiving in stock form. And with the Aero 98 in stock, like the Axis, it feels a bit shaky due to the very responsive string bed, and it being a firm feeling frame as well. It doesn't quite have enough rigidity to begin with, but I find that it responds very well to additional weight and is almost necessary to get the most out of it. Both the Aero and Axis can really come to life under lower tensions or additional swing weight if you're struggling to use it. In my experience, lower tensions on it really does help open it up, make the sweet spot a lot more forgiving and able to handle off-center hits a lot better. For the T-Fight, I would say the T-Fight is the most stable of the lot, noticeably a better racket to block and redirect pacey shots, and much less shaky and more plow through on contact. For a denser string pattern, it also provides a good feel of forgiveness, and that of course goes hand in hand with its stability. The Vcore 98, because of the open string pattern, doesn't diminish a ton off center. It is one of the more forgiving 98s on market and the most forgiving here. It doesn't have great stability in stock form, but I think it's not too bad either, and definitely performs the best when the swing weight is in the mid 320 range. And so I think if you're someone who doesn't want to fiddle with customization and can handle the little bit of extra static weight, the Vcore 98 Tour is a great racket for someone who wants to just grab it off the shelf. So in rankings for stability, I would put the T-Fight first, the Aero 98 second, followed up by the Vcore 98, the Gravity Tour, and the Axis 98. In terms of forgiveness, I would rank the Vcore 98 first, then the Axis 98 and the Aero 98 closely followed behind, along with the T-Fight and then the Gravity Tour. Now for spin, comparing spin in amongst all these frames, there's no slouch for spin whatsoever. They all produce adequate and plentiful spin, and it's going to be which one suits your preference in terms of feel and more importantly the way you swing that will maximize how much spin you'll get out of them. For the Gravity Tour, it's going to give you that super arcing type spin thanks to the high launch angle, and you're really going to need to force it back down hard if you want to maintain the control. The spin is marginally less penetrating than the others because of the power differential, but you are compensated for the amazing touch and feel of the racket. The Axis 98 definitely has big spin potential, it's just not quite as of an explosive racket as the Aero 98 in terms of the raw power and response. But it is very capable, especially with it being easier to handle, and I would say in comparison to the rest of the field, it's probably equal second. The Aero 98 is a bit funny with how it works. It gives you the most spin by far, but the stroke and swing path that optimizes and unleashes that spin is not the typical one that we've come to expect in these modern next-gen style forehands. In my opinion, a swing that begins with a closed racket head doesn't flow very well with how the weight of the frame is distributed, so it can feel slow and clunky. I think if you want an efficient swing path, you need to have good extension and high racket head speed acceleration, and when approaching the ball, the racket face is better off in an open string position to really allow you to come underneath the ball and not using the wrist too much to finish the stroke. For the T-Fight, being the denser string pattern, I think you'll need to be more technically sound to access the spin, but a lower tension and spinnier string will definitely help. If you can wield it properly and swing well, the spin potential is very high. It's one of those rackets that the amount of spin you can create is the type that makes the ball bounce a bit funny, like shoot off the ground or change directions a bit once it digs into the court. Though it is more difficult to access, but you'll reap the rewards if you can use it properly. Likely the T-Fight 300 will give you that arc and a bit more ease of access to that spin, but for advanced players you'll lose that flattening precision, which is not something I personally would want to give up. For the Vcore 98, the spin is mostly because of the string density, launch angle and power potential. Not to say it doesn't produce a lot of spin, because it does, but the racket itself in terms of spin output is just a little lower compared to the others. In order of spin, I would put it as the Aero 98 on top by far, followed closely by the Axis 98 and the T-Fight being basically equal second in terms of max output, but the Axis 98 is going to be easier for most people to generate that spin, and then the Gravity Tour and the Vcore 98 closely behind it. For serving the Gravity Tour, you can't go wrong with it. I have seen and played a number of people that have used it, and honestly they all have very good serves. If you have very handsy technique with a lot of freedom and fluidity, these thinner frames will really cut through the air fast and allow you to maximize racket head speed. That freedom also maximizes at will because you'll be able to control the racket face as you go through multiple parts of the motion. The Axis 98 feels a bit in between the Aero 98 and the Gravity Tour because you have a lot more of that freedom of movement, but the frame is essentially shaped like the Aero, so for my serving style I find it a lot easier to hit my targets, speed through kick serves and wind up for flat ones in comparison to the Aero 98. And whilst the Aero 98 is not particularly my favorite serving racket, only because it requires me to adapt my technique, it's not as easy or free-flowing as the others, and I think you need to body up and be more athletic on your serve using bigger muscle groups. But if you have that particular style, you can get a lot of kick and pace on it. I do find myself not being as accurate with it due to the feel and ball pocketing are lacking for what I like, but that can be more of a preference thing than anything else. The T-Fight is the best serving frame here because you combine the elements of why the Gravity Tour serves well, but you also have more powerful base and a denser string pattern that will really let you swing big with confidence and go for tighter targets. And it's because of that extra maneuverability and freedom of movement, which is why this serves a little better than the Gravity. The Vcore 98 has never failed me on serves. Personally, I have always been able to serve very well with it. It's not as free-flowing as the EZO 98 for instance, but it's never held me back much with getting quite a lot of pace. Years ago I measured the EZO 98 2022 compared to the Vcore 98 side by side for serve speeds, and I was averaging around 194 on the E-Zone and 189 on the Vcore. So it shows you the extra hand speed that you can generate from the EZO 98 2022 will give you naturally a little bit more speed because you can swing faster, but the Vcore is not very far behind at all. For serves, I would personally rate them in order of the T-Fight, the Gravity, the Vcore 98, the Axis 98, and then the Aero. For volleys, I prefer the Gravity Tour mainly because of the touch and feel, although it is a little unstable in stock. The Axis 98 finds a balance of speed and touch that I found it probably is the easiest to use. For the Aero, I'm no Alcaraz and I seem to struggle with it for the most for volleys, maybe because the string bed is too responsive and I can't get a good feel on the ball, but I just don't typically gel with it as much as the others. The T-Fight has potential with its overall maneuverability, but it kind of lacks some free punch that requires you to kind of stick it more. And it does have that stability that transfers from the baseline, but it just doesn't have enough of that punch, like I said. Finally, the Vcore is very well balanced and has nice feel in my opinion, but may suffer if the swing weight's a bit too low, and you have to be a bit careful with the more open string pattern and not letting the volley fly further than you need it to. So which one best suits you? Firstly, understand that my ratings being lower or higher doesn't necessarily mean it's worse or better for the category. It's more important about playability and player fit. When reviewing rackets, I'm most focused on technique, skill level, suitability, and then the performance characteristics, where the characteristics is mostly about your wants and needs, and the other factors are about what you can handle and what fits your playstyle best. Firstly, I think all of these rackets you should really be in the 4.0, ideally 4.5 skill range, or at 6 UTR and above. So for instance, characteristics like in the Gravity Tour, which might give you a little bit less power and spin than say the Aero 98, but as a player you are probably preferring the thinner beam, you want more of that comfort, control and feel, but you still want to be able to perform penetrating spin for the modern day game, and you might not need all of that free spin and power from the Aero, and it might be even somewhat uncontrollable for you, where you're completely capable of self-generating your own power and spin, along with a little bit of help from the frame compared to rackets like the Gravity Pro. Not to mention that feel is far more premium, so that's how I would typically recommend it.
The Aero 98 for me is kind of a paradoxical racket. It's not the easiest to use for inexperienced players and not difficult to use for high intermediates and above either. For me, personally, it's not the best feeling racket and it doesn't have the best control, but there is so much firepower behind it that for every ball you strike hard, the effectiveness per shot generated can be overwhelming compared to a ton of other rackets on the market. So there's certainly something special about it in terms of playability, but when you look at it from the view of a racket nerd in the aspects of something like exceptional feel, quality or aesthetics, it doesn't quite hit it for me, but as a competitor, the joy would certainly come from winning more matches.
The Axis 98 is a nice midway point between the Vcore 98 and the Aero 98, where you get a little bit more maneuverability than both the Aero and the Vcore. It's close enough to the spin of the Aero 98 with a bit more control and comfortable feel from the dampened response. The T-Fight is an all-rounder where the denser string pattern gives you more precision and targeted aggression, whilst providing you a premium feel, racket head speed and spin, and the most stability out of the lot. Finally, the Vcore will give you the most forgiveness, is the easiest racket to use, providing you a blend of comfort, plenty of spin and power, and the most user-friendly. And that concludes my review. Obviously, I can't include all the rackets in the category because it either costs too much for me or the video will get way too long, longer than it needs to be. So let me know what your favorite spin racket is currently, especially in this particular category, if it's on this list or not. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys next time.